Welcome to True Rhymes. Tonight we're going to have a look at an interesting little rhyme. I've been reading a book about the history of language, which is rather interesting. And when it comes to rhymes, of course, you have to have a rhyming story, which brings us to tonight's story, which is all about an old man, and he had to roll home. Growing up, this was one of the few nursery rhymes that Mum would sing to me because it was actually practical. It taught you to count to 10. This old man, he played 1, he played knick-knack on my thumb with a knick-knack, paddywhack, give the dog a bone. This old man came rolling home. This old man, he played 2, he played knick-knack on my shoe with a knick-knack, paddywhack, give the dog a bone. This old man came rolling home. This old man, he played 3, he played knick-knack on my knee with a knick-knack, paddywhack, give the dog a bone. This old man came rolling home. This old man, he played 4, he played knick-knack on the door with a knick-knack, paddywhack, give the dog a bone. This old man came rolling home. This old man, he played 5, he played knick-knack on my hive with a knick-knack, paddywhack, give the dog a bone. This old man came rolling home. This old man, he played 6, he played knick-knack on my sticks with a knick-knack, paddywhack, give the dog a bone. This old man came rolling home. This old man, he played 7, he played knick-knack up to heaven with a knick-knack, paddywhack, give the dog a bone. This old man came rolling home. This old man, he played 8, he played knick-knack on my gate with a knick-knack, paddywhack, give the dog a bone. This old man came rolling home. This old man, he played 9, he played knick-knack on my spine with a knick-knack, paddywhack, give the dog a bone. This old man came rolling home. This old man, he played 10, he played knick-knack once again with a knick-knack, paddywhack, give the dog a bone. This old man came rolling home. Oh, big round of applause for that terrible bit of singing. But anyway, if you're still with us, thank you for your determination. There's always a zip button, so you can push the 30-second skip if you don't want to go through my horrible singing again. What a fun little rhyme. Isn't that cool? And the good part about our rhyme tonight, perhaps you've heard about the potato famine that was going on back in about, I don't know, the mid-1800s. That was a bit of a messed up deal. Apparently it was caused by a potato blight, which it was, but there's a lot more to the story than meets the eye. I'm going to give you a brief history about Ireland and England. And just as a preface, I'm not English or Irish. I'm kind of French-German descent, so I don't know where that leaves me, and it doesn't really matter. So this isn't a critique on history about anybody. It's just an interesting explanation as to how we ended up with this little rhyme. So by the time the famine had started, I think the Irish and the English had been warring since about the 1100s. So we're about 600 years into this mess. And by this stage, England was pretty much running Ireland, and Ireland was, subservient to the English, I guess. So they had to do as they were told in a lot of ways. And the lords and the ladies of the land, they owned everything. Hell, and that included us, or the serfs as they were known in the day, or the little peasants. So it was a little bit interesting. You've got to realise that this whole situation to be going on for about 6 generations. By the time we get to this part of the story, I guess the peasants or the serfs, they'd decided this was their role, and the lords and the ladies, they'd come to the decision that God had ordained them to rule the land, and this was just how it was meant to be. So, nothing really changes in history, does it? The rich and powerful rule over us, and we do as we're told. So in the grand scheme of things, the Irish people had become tenants in their own homeland, which is pretty messed up when you think about it. So it sets the stage for the actual story that we're going to tell you about this potato famine, because history will have this sort of warped sense of the fact that the potato famine was the Irish's fault, but it really wasn't at all. We're 6 generations into this power dynamic, and the church has become a very powerful political movement, and so the people had to fund the church and the government all at once, which is rather an interesting exercise. And what does the church decide to do? How are they going to tax everybody? Where are they going to get the money from? It wasn't kind of cool like our little wages system now, so they come up with this great idea. They thought, tell you what we'll do. We'll actually decide if you happen to have a hearth in your house, which is a fireplace, by the way, which I'm assuming in Ireland they all had a fireplace, you would have to pay an extra tax. So every extra fireplace you had, you had to actually pay a bit more to the church or the government to run the show. And so the poor bloomin' Irish people that were too bloomin' poor to pay the tax, well, they had to get the fires bricked up. But I guess it had a choice between, are you going to piss God off or are you going to keep warm? But the fact that sometimes the soldiers would come up and kill your whole family and you if you didn't pay your tax might have had an influence on the deal as well. Now, of course, we all know all good things must come to an end. As we go along this story, good old King Henry VIII turns up again. He seems to play a role in a lot of these shows. Henry decided he didn't like the wife that he had and he wanted a new wife. So he sent the Pope a letter and said, "Hey, can I get a divorce?" And the Pope sent back another letter and said, "Not bloody likely, I can't have one wife. Never mind, you'll just have to make do. What's more, there's probably plenty of hot young ladies for you to bed in that kingdom of yours anyway." But Henry was not having a bit of it. So what did he do? He actually came up with his own scheme and decided maybe I'll become my own bloomin' church, I'll be the Pope of my own church in such a figuration. And of course, if you're actually, I guess, the head of the church, you get to talk to God. God says divorce is fine. Sorted. So you know what? You can cut a few heads off, chuck a few wives in the dungeon, and God sanctioned it because, you're God's rep. So, well, in the grand scheme of history, I guess it was a win-win for Henry, but going forward in our story, it gets a little bit messed up for our Irish brothers and sisters. Now we get to the point where this is actually an important part of our rhyme story, because Henry, being the new king of his own church, well, I guess the new leader of his own church, he decided that he was going to go around and start confiscating all the Catholic churches and Catholic monasteries that were through the land. And of course, Henry was the king of Ireland as well, so he went rolling through Ireland taking stuff. So as you can imagine, this pissed the Pope off no end, because here's Henry confiscating churches, confiscating the jolly monasteries. Jammin' hell, there was a whole revenue stream that just disappeared in smoke. And of course, Henry was thinking, man, this is a really profitable exercise. Not only do you get to talk to God, you get to get a heck of a lot of coins in your pocket. One of the comments I thought was really cool though, and I'm gonna have to read it to you because this is a really interesting comment from the Irish perspective. "So long as Pope Henry the wife murderer doesn't dissolve the pubs, I don't think we should have a problem." I thought that was a great quote, so I had to do that verbatim because otherwise I'd mess it up. And so you can imagine things have got a little bit stressed in the empire because we've got, I don't know where Henry's up to with his wives, but anyway, he's having a messy time. And we've got the Pope who's annoyed no end. And we've got the poor bloody English folk that are going with the king. And then we've got the Irish dudes that are going, hang on a minute, we're still kind of Catholic. So the wash up of all that, if I'm making any sense at all, is that if you were Irish and you still wanted to be Catholic, you couldn't own anything. So what a bloody mess. And why potatoes, you may ask? I don't think the potatoes were actually a naturally growing thing in Ireland. I always thought that the Irish actually invented the jolly potato, but it wasn't. It just happened to grow nicely in their land. But why was it important? Because what happened was, as the thing developed, you had all the lords and ladies owning all the land and then owning all the people, which then they had to rent the land, which they used to own, which is really messed up in itself. And of course, as things got worse and worse over the next 200 years, more and more money was extracted from the Irish populace. So the poor serfs had to actually find a way to pay the taxes and feed the family. And of course, if you can't afford to pay anybody, you got to breed a few people to do the work. So they were good at making kids. And of course, you have some more kids, you have to grow some more potatoes because, man, someone's got to eat them. And potatoes per foot of dirt are absolutely amazing for the amount of calories they can create. So they were a win-win situation until, wouldn't you know it, if you grow the bloody same crop in the same dirt long enough, some shit's got to go wrong. So as you can imagine, the potato blight turns up. So now you haven't got any food, you haven't got any way to pay the taxes. So bloomin' hell, if you weren't poor before, now you're really poor. So hell, you had nothing, now you got less than nothing. How the hell you having less than nothing? I don't know. But you could probably go back and check out the poor bastards in the Irish famine and they had less than nothing because it was messed up bad. And the other screwed up part was the lords and ladies of the land, they still had to pay the taxes for the people that were living on their land. Now this is where it gets really screwy. The lords were still held accountable and they were taxed by the amount of people they had on their property. So if you wouldn't pay your rent and you weren't generating anything, then you'd get shipped off your land and just as a kicker, they'd set fire to your bloody house. I mean, how screwed up is that? So you couldn't come back. Not that I'm defending the lords, but they had their own issues because the bloody powers that be wanted to get paid. Of course, you've got to love humanity, don't you? We're always the way of justifying anything. The Lords decided in their great wisdom that the blight of the potatoes was God's choice to thin the Irish populace. I mean, how messed up is that? I mean, honestly, wouldn't you get a can of blooming, I don't know, fungicide? Well, hopefully you're still along for the ride. I just thought we needed a little bit of backstory as to what was going on in our rhyme. And if you didn't have some history, well, you'd be a little confused because, yeah, it is a happy little song, but it's not really got a happy tale to it. So the old man, or the people in our rhyme, is really referring to the poor Irish folk that were in the middle of this blooming Irish famine. And somewhere around 1 million people died of starvation or disease, and I think another 1 million people buggered off around the rest of the world. And the only upside that I can see about this whole bloody mess in time of history, the only upside that I can figure out, is that we get to drink in an Irish pub here in Oz. I reckon that's great. I love a Guinness and a bit of good old-fashioned Irish whiskey. Hell, if there's one, I mean, that's a pretty grim way to get pubs spread across the planet, but still. And the really sad part about it is, the really poor of the poor that couldn't afford to go, I guess, further afield to Australia or America or a few other European countries, well, they could only afford to skip across the Jolly Channel and ended up in England, which was not the best option. And that's who's in this rhyme. So the poor Irish folks that got off the Channel and washed up on the English shores, well, they were the poorer of the poor. So how messed up is that? And then, of course, who got the job of trying to help them? The bloody poor English folk that were already poor. Because, I mean, at that time in history, the English weren't rolling in cash neither. The poor folks in both of these stories had to bloom and try and help each other. So that's why our rhyme uses the term knick-knack, because a knick-knack is obviously a small thing or a small price. So it's actually very relative, because here we go, we've got poor people and really poor people, and they decided that, hell, you know what? The Irish needed a job, and they haven't got any money. We haven't got any money, but we've got a little bit of money so we could get things done. So the idea is for a knick-knack, you could get things fixed. You could get your gate fixed, you could get your shoes polished or fixed, and you could get them to pick you some firewood. I don't know, whatever else is in that song. The one other thing that I thought was really cool, you could even get them to mourn at your funeral. Hell, I mean, some people can't even draw a crowd when they're dead. I'm not 100% sure about the term paddywhack, but I'm assuming if you didn't have a job for the bloke to do, you'd give him a whack around the back of the head and send him on his way. Of course, paddy was slang that the English used for the Irish that had turned up on their shores. So I'm guessing poor old Paddy got a whack and got sent on to do something else for someone else. And of course, giving the dog a bone, that's slang for a second chance. Hell, everybody likes a second chance. I don't know. I reckon if I'd just washed up on the shore and was one of the few that survived this famine, I'd be looking for a second chance. The English folk, they had decided, well, you know what? Here we are. We've got this mess. We're all in this together, perhaps. So, hell, I'd like a second chance if it was me. So they did the right thing and gave the paddies a job. And I've thought about our last line, this old man came rolling home. Originally, I was thinking it's probably about, perhaps if they got a second chance, they just got drunk and rolled home because, I don't know, that's one way to look at it. But I reckon in the end, rolling home sounds rather happy. So perhaps it was just the fact that they rolled home, impressed that they had a second chance and they'd actually got a little bit of money. And hell, never know, they might make it through another day. Well, thanks for watching. Hell, I tell you what, it's more involved than you think researching rhymes. It takes a fair bit of time. So if you're enjoying the show, don't forget, click, like, subscribe, share. Hell, even if you feel like so led, perhaps throw a few bucks into the Patreon support page. You never know where we'll end up.